Yemen's warring parties extend a 2-month truce. The UN hails the agreement, but ceasefires have failed in the past. Will this one hold? And could it lead to a lasting peace? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Yemen. Seven years of war have destroyed Yemen. The vast majority of the population lives below the poverty line, making it the poorest country in the Middle East. Numerous attempts to broker a lasting ceasefire have failed, but now there may be a chance for a durable peace. The recognized government, backed by Saudi Arabia, and Iran-backed Houthi rebels have agreed to extend a 2-month truce. For the first time in a long while, there has been relative calm in the country. And the UN says this is the time to end the war. But is that really a possibility? That debate in a moment, but first, Mohammed Walji has this report.
When the Saudi-led coalition entered Yemen in 2015, they hoped the war would be swift. 7 years later, they're still there. And so is the suffering. As Houthi rebels and coalition forces vie for control, civilians are losing their lives in the crossfire. Not to mention the millions who've been displaced, and the millions more who are starving.
We eat only what we can get from aid agencies, wheat, beans, and such items. If we don't receive food, then some days we eat and other days we go hungry.
But now, for Yemen's more than 30 million people, there is hope.
I'm also pleased that the truce was extended for additional 2 months, which is a positive signal of the parties' seriousness to uphold and implement the truce.
The first ceasefire started in April. It was hailed as a massive breakthrough and a major boost for the peace process. The warring sides agreed to halt all military operations inside the country and across its borders. The Houthis allowed oil tankers into the port of Hodeidah, and the Saudi-led coalition lifted its blockade on the airport in Sana'a. Fuel was now coming in, and for the first time in 6 years, commercial flights flew from the capital.
I've been waiting here since I first heard there will be a flight. But later, there was some news that the flight will come soon, or it will be cancelled or delayed. Now, thanks to God, I can finally go abroad to receive treatment.
According to the Norwegian Refugee Council, in the first month of the agreement, there was a 50% fall in the number of civilians killed or injured. Previous ceasefires have broken down pretty quickly, but this one seems to be holding, at least for the most part. The Houthis are refusing to break a 7-year siege on the southwestern city of Taiz, and its residents are angry.
I want to go visit my family, relatives and friends. But the siege is what's keeping us from reaching our families. We had hoped that the truce would lift the siege and open the main roads. But the failure of these negotiations have left us disappointed.
And the UN hopes the break in fighting could lead to a lasting peace.
We had a 2-month truce. We're going through another 2-month truce. That's all positive momentum. It is good news for the people of Yemen who have suffered so much in this man-made crisis.
Even before the bombs and bullets all but destroyed the country, Yemen was already in trouble. War has just added to its woes. The Arab nation is now one of the poorest in the Middle East and home to the world's worst humanitarian crisis. But help is hard to come by. In March, the UN held a high-level donor conference aiming to raise over $5 billion. It raised just 1.3. To make matters worse, an oil tanker that's been stranded in the Red Sea for 6 years is close to breaking up. If it happens, it could cause a major environmental disaster.
The Safir oil tanker threatens to spill more than 1 million barrels of oil into the Red Sea, devastating the coast, destroying livelihoods, depleting fisheries, and potentially disrupting traffic through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal.
In a rare appeal to the public, the UN has set up a crowdfunding campaign. It wants to raise $20 million, because if the ship decays enough, it could cause the largest oil spill in living memory. Environmentalists warn the cost to clean up will be close to $20 billion, not to mention the impact on the Yemeni people. More than 1.5 million rely on the Red Sea for food and trade, and for a nation already in crisis, a catastrophe like this is exactly what they don't need. Mohammed Walji, The Newsmakers.
So, can this tenuous peace in Yemen be sustained? Joining me now to debate that from London is Sami Hamdi. He is the editor-in-chief of the International Interest. From Sana'a is pro-Houthi journalist Hussain Albukhaiti. And from Washington, D.C. is Giorgio Cafiero. He is the founder and CEO of Gulf State Analytics, a geopolitical risk consultancy. Thanks so much for joining us. Hussain, I'm going to start with you because you are in Yemen. Please tell us how much this ceasefire has actually changed the lives of Yemenis over the past 3 months. Is it a tangible difference?
Actually, it's much better than before the truce, even though Saudi has not permit all the ships that has, as an example, promised to enter Hodeidah. There are few ships with fuels and food that enter in Hodeidah, and as well the flight. There are about 7 to 8 flights that have reached Sana'a airport, and hundreds of Yemenis civilians who were injured by this war or who are ill have taken that chance to leave Yemen to get medical care outside Yemen. But of course, Saudi is still not fulfilling the entire truce because they only allow the flight to go out of Sana'a maybe with 2 weeks before the end of the first truce. But I'm sure that if the Saudi will fulfill what was said in this truce agreement, I'm sure that this will actually affect directly in a good way all Yemeni civilians.
Okay. So I know you have long complained primarily about the issue of the Saudi blockade on Hodeidah, but you've indicated that you seem optimistic about this agreement so far. Hussain, I'll stay with you. What do you think can actually bring this ceasefire to fulfillment and make it lasting so that Yemen will not have to see any return to war?
I don't think it will last because we have seen that since the so-called President Hadi was stepped down, actually, as according to the Wall Street Journal, there are claims that he was forced to leave power to the new governing council. We see that the Saudi actually they are trying to regroup and United Arab Emirates to regroup all the groups in Yemen and the fighters in Yemen which used to fight under the Saudi United Arab Emirates backed forces. That's why I think they are using this truce. They want to bring a new war toward Yemen, but I'm sure that they're gonna fail because Saudi and United Arab Emirates and all their groups they fought as one when they started this war, but they have failed to reach their goals. And I'm sure that on the other side, Yemeni forces here in Sana'a are totally different than the beginning of the war. They have ballistic missiles, they have all type of weapons that they can actually reach deep inside Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates.
Okay, Sami, let me turn to you. I mean, many Yemenis have now been able to see at least a minor improvement in the quality of their lives, but we're hearing from Hussain there that this ceasefire probably won't last. From what I understand, you actually agree that this is only a temporary improvement. But I mean, how difficult will it be for these warring parties to allow a return to the standard of living under war, with Yemen suffering as badly as it has been?
I think it's important to talk realistically with regards to the reasons why the truce was agreed in the first place. It was agreed because the Houthis failed to take over Ma'rib. They launched a major offensive. They were defeated after the UAE decided to get its loyalists to intervene, and they essentially created the spectacular reversal of the Houthi offensive in Ma'rib. And the Houthis were worried of a counterattack, and as a result, they finally decided to agree to a truce despite rejecting talks on a number of different occasions. The Houthis believe, as they did in 2018 when they signed the truce then with the Stockholm Agreement, that they need this truce in order to regroup, in order to have time to launch another offensive on Ma'rib, because it's important to remember that Ma'rib is a province that is rich in resources. The Houthis believe that in the territories they currently control, they don't have enough resources to push for autonomy at the negotiating table. Therefore, in the seventh war that they've launched to take over Yemen, they believe that the time is not right to negotiate for an end to the war, given that they are unable to push for that autonomy that they wish. And this is why they believe that they need this truce in order to regroup for the offensive on Ma'rib. For the Saudi side, it's different. The Saudis believe that this truce comes at a good time. The truce allows for Saudis to essentially gather all the different various competing factions under one umbrella, which is the Presidential Council, and also believes that the truce helps to give a window of opportunity for Biden to visit Saudi Arabia with a straight face in order to reconcile these ties. Bin Salman believes that Biden's visit will be a huge victory, and therefore Saudi also has an interest in seeing this truce last. In other words, it's as the Arabs say, haqqun urida bihi batil. It's a correct thing, but for the wrong reasons. It's a truce that everybody wants, but it's been achieved not because people actually want this truce to last. And this is why I think there is some optimism that the truce may well last, because the Houthis are not ready yet to launch a major offensive, and the Saudis are not ready yet to go back to war, and they won't be ready at least for another few months. And this is what gives an opportunity for the UN to find some sort of peace accord, either to break the alliance that backs the Houthi, or at least to come to some sort of accord whereby Yemen is divided up as a cake between the different factions, UAE, Saudi, Iran, Houthis, and the like, and somehow we accept this piecemeal agreement in order to celebrate the end of a humanitarian crisis, which might explode again in 5 years when another party decides to take over in the manner the Houthis did.
Okay. Let me bring Giorgio in. Giorgio, I mean, is this just a temporary respite that, as Sami was describing, is actually part of the Houthi strategy before it can regroup and plan another offensive properly?
Well, as articulated by my colleagues, there are very valid concerns that this truce is just temporary, and obviously this has been very good for the people of Yemen from a humanitarian standpoint. This truce was very needed after so many years of warfare that made life just simply unbearable. But there are these really difficult political issues that are not being resolved because of this truce. The different sides still have zero trust in the others. I think the Houthis might think that this is just sort of a trick, and the truce is being used to manipulate the Houthi rebels so that the GCC-backed coalition can sort of regroup and perhaps attack the Houthis later on with some greater unity. And maybe this is an effort to try to convince the Houthis to demilitarize somewhat. Likewise, considering the fact that earlier this year, the Houthis had some of their previous gains reversed, and the UAE and Saudi Arabia became a little more unified in their position against the Houthis. Definitely some views expressed by some that the Houthis are simply just taking advantage of this truce because a continuation of warfare could have been very bad for the Houthis at the time in which the truce came into effect. Unfortunately, until...
So, I mean, it's interesting because Sami and Giorgio, as you articulated, both sides, the Saudi-UAE alliance as well as the Houthis, seem to be able to find a strategy to regroup during the ceasefire. But Hussain, I want to ask you to respond to what Sami was saying, and that the Houthis in particular are not done with the fighting. And, you know, some have actually accused the Houthis of needing to fight because the group will almost lose its reason for existing if it is not at war. How do you respond to that? Is there any truth there? And why are the Houthis in particular, you can speak to their side, not done with this fight?
Of course, that the Yemeni forces are not done with the fight because their main goal is to liberate all Yemen. In any truce, in any war around the world, every side is using this truce either to regroup or to send a new enforcement. This is actually normal, and what Sana'a is doing now is exactly the same, and as well with the Saudi. But if we see on the other hand, as example, the United Arab Emirates is now building a new airport in Mocha port in west of Taiz, and to show you that United Arab Emirates, they are making those projects either in Socotra Island or Bab el Mandab or as well in this Mocha port, is because they think that they actually they are there to stay for long time. That's why for Sana'a forces, they have promised that they will continue the fight till they actually totally liberate Yemen, because they will not allow for any foreign troops to stay in Yemen. And I just want to mention that Mr. Sami have said that this truce came because what he called or named the Houthis could not retake Marib. Here Sana'a forces, they have advanced from Sana'a in Nahm area that was under the control of Saudi Arabia, east of Sana'a, and they continued to Al Jawf and then to Marib, and they have not actually retreated 1 meter during this last fight toward Marib. And Mr. Sami is talking as well that this truce, it looked like that is in the favor, as he said, I mean in his explanation of the Houthi, because of Marib, they would like maybe to try to retake Marib again. I don't think that the Saudi actually will make any truce just for the, as he called them, the Houthi to make advantage for themselves. That this truce has come after that major attack on Aramco oil facility in Saudi Arabia, especially in Jeddah. That's why Yemeni forces is still well equipped, and I believe that when the fight will come for Marib, it will take Yemeni forces a matter of days, because now Sana'a forces can actually threaten Saudi and United Arab Emirates economy to stop them from supporting all groups in Yemen.
Okay, Sami, I need to get your response to what Hussain says, especially from the angle that he's taking, that's saying there's one side that wants to liberate all of Yemen. Is there a good guy in this conflict? Is there a right way to do this?
Andrea, when the Houthis marched into Jawf and Amran in 2014, UAE forces were not in Yemen. Neither were Saudi forces, neither were any external or foreign forces. When the Houthis entered Sana'a and stormed in and put the president under house arrest, there were no Saudi or UAE forces or any foreign forces on Yemen territory. When the Houthis were told by John Kerry that they might be a viable partner in the fight against terrorism, and therefore they were encouraged, they marched on Lahij and Ta'iz towards the south, and there were still no UAE or Saudi forces. Saudi UAE forces came only after the Houthis were on the cusp of actually taking over Yemen when they arrived at the gates of Aden. The second point that's worth mentioning is that Hussein says that the Saudis wanted a truce because they bombed Aramco. That's true. The Saudis, since the Houthis have been attacking the oil facilities, have been insisting and pushing for the truce. But the Houthis kept rejecting the offers. They kept rejecting the offer after offer after offer until they suffered the reversal in Ma'rib, and they suddenly realized, as they did in 2018, that they were on the verge of a military defeat. Let's take up the offer of a truce. The UN will push Saudi to agree. Biden will push Saudi to agree, and we can come and take this time to regroup and essentially prepare to fight it again. In other words, Hussein is saying the truth, but not making the correct conclusion from that particular truth. In terms of your question, is there a good or a bad guy? The reality is this: Yemenis took to the streets in order to ask for a democratic transition. They entered a national dialogue. During the period of this national dialogue, the Houthis managed to wipe out their opponents in Sa'da after they'd been blockaded and failing in their sixth attempt to take over Yemen. The Houthis took advantage of the national dialogue while the Yemenis were discussing to begin their military expansion. After the Yemenis agreed in a national dialogue, the Houthis overthrew it by taking over Sana'a. In other words, when it comes to who's the good or bad guy, the question is this: are you in favor of a democratic process and a national dialogue that the Yemenis engaged in, or are you in favor of one militia that teamed up with a former dictator to overthrow that democratic transition, and now you're ready to accept it because you're not willing to engage the resources in order to push them out? I think that's the question that viewers have to ask themselves, because the reality is, and I'll finish on this point, the reality is that this is not the first war the Houthis are fighting to take over Yemen. This is the seventh, and this is the most successful attempt that they've had in taking over Yemen. Never before in their previous 6 attempts have they taken over Sana'a. This time they've taken over Sana'a. The Houthis believe there's too much to lose now. There's no point negotiating if we don't get autonomy. And this is why when it comes to this truce, and I finish on this point, I promise. When it comes to the truce, the Houthis believe the truce is only valuable because they need time to prepare militarily to push for autonomy. And the truce becomes of no value whatsoever when they're ready to push through. Giorgio is correct when he says that the coalition or the Saudis are getting ready for an offensive. But they're getting ready for an offensive because they've been here before. They know the Houthis are going to try to attack. But this time, instead of going along with what the US or the UN believe to be this effort or this noble cause that there will be some sort of peace, the coalition are saying, we know the Houthis are getting ready. We know they're regrouping. We're not going to be taken by surprise. The Houthis haven't lifted their blockade on Ta'iz because they want to use that as a jumping board. We are ready for them, and we are also preparing as well. That's why Giorgio is a bit despondent with regards to the truce, because he knows this as well.
Okay. Giorgio, let me get your take on that. I mean, Sami is saying this is the Houthis' most successful attempt to take power in the country, but it's almost destroyed the country in its attempt to do that. And, you know, symbolically, we actually just saw the 32nd anniversary of Unification Day just about a month ago. Where do you see the future of that unification, given this, what everyone seems to foresee as a return to the fighting, and particularly the Houthis' determination to succeed, and I put that in quotations, to succeed with this attempt to take power in Yemen?
Well, ever since the reunification of Yemen at the end of the Cold War, the whole concept of the Yemeni nation state has been very difficult, very, very fragile, very problematic in many ways. We simply don't know what the Yemeni nation state is going to look like even a few months, few years down the line. I think there are some very legitimate concerns that maybe we'll just have more truce extensions, but no real political settlement to the crises in Yemen, and this will sort of just lead to a de facto breakup of the country, with the Houthis consolidating and further institutionalizing their grip on power in the capital and other parts of northern Yemen, with the Houthis' enemies also consolidating their power in other parts of the country. I certainly don't think, excuse me, I certainly don't think the Houthis taking over all of Yemen is in the cards. I just think that's not realistic by virtue of how many Yemenis who are heavily armed would oppose that and certainly fight for that. But again, if we don't see Yemen move toward a lasting and a just and sustainable political settlement, I do think it's very possible that you'll see the country basically carved up.
Okay. I mean, Hussain, what do you see? Do you think this is a country that can stay united? And if it doesn't stay united, I mean, how much more can be destroyed before some kind of settlement or agreement is reached again?
If we see who is trying to divide the country or to divide Yemen, is United Arab Emirates, and is playing a major part in doing so. They have created some groups, and as well the so-called Southern Transition Council, and that group actually their main goal is to, as they say, to divide Yemen, and is United Arab Emirates actually who is trying to do so, and we see what they are doing in the south, as I told you about the airports and controlling key areas, building ports and many major infrastructure, because they believe that if Yemen is separated, this Southern Transition Council, it is loyal to United Arab Emirates, and it will stay loyal, and United Arab Emirates will keep its interest in south of Yemen. But this actually is not gonna happen, because as Sana'a now have the full force to attack United Arab Emirates, they can actually destroy all these goals in a matter of time. And just one final small point, when Mr. Sami has mentioned what he said, the retake of Sana'a from, as he called the Houthis, and he's spoken about Hadi was under house arrest. I mean, look, they started this war, as they say, to bring Hadi legitimacy to Sana'a, and Saudi Arabia has forced Hadi to step down, and he's now under house arrest. So they show you clearly that the main goal is to destroy Yemen, and the only group to fight that is Ansarullah, the Houthi, or as they called Ansarullah.
Okay, we just have a minute left. Sami, I mean, to finish, you know, Yemen is not the center of global attention. It's hardly even a priority, for as desperate as the situation really is. If it does not improve, and no one seems to think it will, at least on this panel, The country is already by many considered a failed state of sorts, so what are the risks to the rest of the region and the world if this continues to fall into the abyss?
I think that Yemen is descending into chaos, but I do think that there is some sort of resolution on the horizon. I think the U.S. envoy Tim Lenderking told Congress that he's not necessarily averse to splitting Yemen. Saudis and the UAE historically have preferred a divided Yemen. Iran would be content with a northern Yemen. The Houthis, if they take Ma'rib and the UAE, and they might be able to negotiate with Saudi and UAE for Ma'rib, they will be happy with the northern Yemen. The Houthis are concerned about resources, which is why they're worried about the south. The southern separatists are heavily supported by UAE. UAE is already investing there. They're already preparing for a southern Yemen. It appears to be that all of the international actors are sort of going towards the approach of, if you can't live with each other, let's just split Yemen into two. It's not what the Yemenis want, but what Yemenis want has never really mattered either for the Houthis or for the competing factions. It's all about the rule of the sword, the rule of the gun. And in this, the gun says that given that we can't agree, let's just carve out Yemen into fiefdoms.
Okay.
That's what the Presidential Council represents. That's what the Houthis are carving out. That's what the Southern Separatists want. That's what the US and the UN are going towards in their negotiations.
Okay, Sami Hamdi, Hussain Albukhaiti, and Giorgio Cafiero, thank you all so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Again, a fascinating discussion, and our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.